go.
Alright guys, so we're back on the Rambler station wagon build. So if you haven't been following along, we are taking a 1961 AMC Rambler Classic station wagon and essentially putting it on top of a Corvette frame. But that isn't as easy as it sounds, so we are ripping the entire Rambler apart, ripping the entire Corvette apart, and designing the entire frame in CAD from scratch. So we had to measure the entire Rambler, measure the entire Corvette, and then design how they're going to fit together. So at the end of the last video, this is kind of where we left off. We are using the green section of the frame, which is the front of the Corvette frame, and the rest of the frame we are making ourselves. So in this video, we have to figure out what power plant we're going to use and how we're going to fabricate the rest of this frame. So I know you're thinking, another LS swap. Yep, that's what we're doing. It is the easiest and the most affordable way that we can make really good power in the Rambler but keep it reliable at the same time. So we ended up picking up a 1999 Camaro that was already built with heads, cam, an aftermarket clutch, a T56. It was tuned, it had injectors. It was a really nice car, but ended up having a salvage title, so we got the entire car pretty cheap, running and driving. That way we could test it out, see if it was good. And it was a really good platform to start with because we had the whole harness and everything that we could use. So as you can see here, we're gotta rip the whole motor apart so we can try to fit the motor into our chassis we're building.
Well, that's what they do on the assembly line. Just
I want to see him just that one.
yeah, that's pretty big to get in there.
So we got the motor out. We were kind of baffled about how tight it was, and it was kind of nerve-wracking to see how tight it was in that Camaro. If you're not familiar, F-body Camaros are super tight engine bays. The motor's really shoved super far back under the cowl, so you can't even get the intake manifold off easily. It's just really difficult to work on inside the car. But we ended up dropping it out from the bottom and getting it planned out into our chassis. Alright, so this is what it looks like with the motor in the frame. So as you can see, we wanted the Corvette to handle just as well as it did like it was designed from the factory. So we wanted the motor to be pretty far back, kind of like it was originally in the C4, but obviously with an LS. And if you don't know, a C4 is a cast iron block and an LS1 is an aluminum block, so we're saving a little bit of weight off the nose. We also have to design a cross member for our T56 transmission and engine mounts for our LS. So we decided to go with a C5, C6 style motor mount. They're a lot easier to get in and out. It's just 2 bolts from the bottom. I recommend if you guys are doing LS swaps to try to incorporate those motor mounts. They're super awesome. And it made the frame go together pretty easy. So as you can see, kind of a side shot of the frame. Look how tall the transmission tunnel is and the drive shaft tunnel has to be if the frame is the bottom of the floor. So we're going to have a pretty big invasive transmission tunnel and a pretty big invasive drive shaft tunnel that we're going to have to accommodate for in the frame design. But you know, that's part of it. Because it's independent rear, the drive shaft doesn't move, so it's going to have to be tucked up pretty high. So now with our cross member for our T56 transmission, the frame's super wide, so we need a strong cross member that is also low profile because of the floor is so flat. So we have some bracing in it and also some cutouts so we can fit our exhaust underneath. So now it's time we gotta start making this stuff. So the way we're gonna start manufacturing this is we have a water jet, which if you're not familiar with what a water jet is, it's a machine that can cut a variety of amount of materials with just water and a little bit of sand. And this is able to cut out all the pieces that we're going to need for the Rambler frame and be able to cut them precisely enough so we can bend them up and weld them together. So let's start making this frame. Alright, so I don't have a ton of footage of us bending up the frame and welding it together, but you kind of get the idea. We need to water jet the parts out, go to the press brake, bend them, and then we have our welder Don weld them all together and kind of mock up what it's going to look like. So the way that it goes together are kind of like a box, and then he just has to spot weld them together. And they're reinforced on the inside, and then he can go through and seam weld all of them together at the end. So now we're going to start cutting up the C4 Corvette. So on the front of the frame, it looked like it got hit or bent a little bit in its previous life. It wasn't severe enough that it really concerned us, but we just noticed it so we could account for it when we weld the front clip to the frame that we're making. So when they cut the front of the frame off, it has to be really perfect because it has to line up with the frame perfectly so we can weld that piece together.
There we go. Pretty non-eventful.
Right. Here, grab that cable off of that.
Christian, what did you do, man? You're supposed to be welding the car together, not cut it in half. Broke my Corvette.
Broken knot.
Good job. Look at that. They're perfectly balanced, too. Good job. Sweet.
Alright, so when they cut the frame off, it looked pretty good. So the edges were nice and straight, so we could clean them up with the Sawzall, and then we can go ahead and start figuring out how we're going to mock up attaching it to the rest of the frame that we actually made. So here's kind of a better shot of the end of the frame where you can see how we have the tabs laid out. So a lot of it's riveted together so we could mock it up, and then he can go along the edges and seam weld the rest of it together. This lets us slide the end of the frame into the Corvette part of the frame, and it should line up pretty straight. And that way everything is nice and square whenever we go to weld it. So, and then you can also see our cross member and then our back suspension where we're going to mount our independent rear. So the big slot in it is where we're going to mount our control arms for the rear suspension, and they're actually hollow and don't have just tapped holes in there because we want to make a different style mounts for it, so we can go through and adjust different suspension parameters depending on what type of racing we're going to be doing with the Rambler. And this will let us dial in the suspension and get it adaptable to hook in a lot of different scenarios. The rectangular crossbar in the back is where the rear differential is going to mount, and that actually ends up being where we put our rear sway bar through as well. So, and that also acts as a brace, bracing the frame, because you can see how wide it is. It's going to need a lot of structural bracing in the floor that we're going to have to come up with that can brace the frame together so it's not really flimsy. And this is what's left of our Corvette. We actually probably didn't need the entire car, but we ended up buying the whole thing anyway. We probably only needed the front clip of it, but that's all we used on this build. We also have the rear suspension that we haven't pulled out yet. So now with our Rambler build, we kind of have what's pictured in our CAD file in real life. So we have our frame kind of made up, and we're fitting it to the front clip, and then we're going to install our rear suspension and see how this body is going to fit on top of our frame. So as you can kind of see in our CAD file, we've put all of our points together from the ferro arm and made a body-like structure so we can see where everything's going to fit and how it's going to look, so we can get the stance and everything set before we go cutting up a bunch of cars and wasting a bunch of time and material by trying to figure out how it's going to be. We can do it this way and it'll save us a bunch of fabrication time in the future. So that's going to be it for this video. We post Rambler videos every Friday. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.